Good evening. It is now 6:06 and welcome to the May 6, 2024 Community Development Committee meeting. I am the chair, Louis Washington. Today's meeting is being recorded and will be on the city's website. Thank you for joining us. Okay, with that said, we'll move right into roll call. And I'm here. Councilmember Watten's here. Councilmember Johnson, City Administrator is here. Okay, and we have Director Architecture that's here. So we'll move right into the agenda, Bill. So everyone's here for roll call. With the agenda bill, we will move into our first item of regular business to approve the agenda. With that said, my computer.
Moved.
I do want to make one motion, one change. I just think with the time constraint, I do want to push the council member items of interest to our next meeting. We have some agenda bills we'd like to discuss, and I want to make sure that we have time to really dive into those items in case there's some questions. So I'll make a motion that if we could remove or push and remove council member items of interest, essentially push that to the next meeting.
Sure.
Second. Okay. So with that said, we'll do we have to put it up to vote in a committee or?
Only if there's objection.
Okay, no objection. Okay, sounds good. We'll move that to the next meeting. And motion passes and the agenda is approved. So public comment. I have a reading here. So with public comment, we will now come to the public comment portion of our meeting. Public comment will be accepted by in-person attendees only. Is there anyone in the council chambers who would like to make a public comment? Okay, not seeing anyone in person. Okay, so with that said, we'll close public comment. Okay, so the next item of business, thank you for approving me as a panelist. Next item of business, we will move on to our agenda item and approval of the minutes dated dated March 1st, 2004.
2024.
Oh, sorry, 2024. I have my glasses today. So I'd like to make a motion to pass the minutes. Any objection? Okay.
Clarification. What is the date?
I have March 1st. Almost seems like that should be April. Is that okay. Yeah, I kind of saw that. That's why I stumbled on that.
Well, it's April 1st,
okay.
right?
Well, that's okay. So what is the correct date for those? April 1st.
April Fools.
April 1st. So with that said, thank you. Good catch, Councilmember Juan. So with that said, I want to make sure that I change the date for the approval of approval of minutes.
Chair.
April 1st, 2024. Yes.
I don't actually think that the minutes have to be changed. It was just in the agenda listed as March 1st.
Okay. So the agenda. Any objections on adopting the minutes from April 1st? Okay. So the motion passes unanimously. With that said, we'll go into our next item on the agenda, which is Agenda Bill 24-05, text amendments for House Bill 1220 compliance. I am going to turn this over to Director Artecha to introduce the item.
Yes, so today we have our contract planner, Andrew Levins, who's going to be leading you through the Planning Commission's recommendation on emergency housing. Essentially, that is House Bill 1220 and the text amendments to the code associated with that. So Andrew, would you like to come up? Thank you.
Good evening, council members. It's nice to be here in person with you tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Thank you.
So as Director Arteche had mentioned, this agenda bill is regarding a proposed amendment to the Snoqualmie Municipal Code in response to House Bill 1220. House Bill 1220 specifically addresses the types of supportive housing uses and the zones that those uses must be allowed in every GMA planning city in the state. The city started this effort earlier this year, and on April 15th, the Planning Commission held an open record hearing and received no public comment and recommended the amendments as proposed to the Community Development Committee for review. I'll take you through the substance of what is being proposed. The municipal code currently only defines two types of supportive housing uses, and that is shelters for temporary placement and special needs housing. These uses aren't sufficient to meet the requirements of HB 1220, which is the basis for why we are proposing these amendments at this time. These amendments aren't intended to specifically address any deficiency in the municipal code. Rather, they are to implement the floor for supportive housing uses that the state has established statewide. So in order to do that, we had to propose the four types of uses be integrated into the code. And we did that by proposing emergency house. So there's two of the types of uses are emergency housing and emergency shelter. Due to the size of the city of Snoqualmie and how we are in practice envisioning these uses being implemented, the Community Development Department opted to kind of streamline these definitions into a single use category in order to keep the use table simple and easy to interpret. So emergency housing or shelter is the result of that combination. It's temporary indoor accommodations for individuals and families who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. It may or may not require to have a lease agreement, and they can also include just daytime shelters that don't provide any overnight services. The third, I should say, type of housing use that's required by HB 1220 is permanent supportive housing, which is kind of more what you think about when you think of affordable housing. It's leased housing with no length of stay. Oftentimes these uses will also provide services that can such as mental health services or financial advice services, things of that nature. It's open to everybody, but prioritizes people who need these types of services. And then the fourth type is special needs housing. That is housing that is provided for persons and their dependents who, by virtue of disability or other factors, have impediments to achieving independent living. We're also proposing changes to the city's existing definition of transitional housing facilities. This was, let me get down to the table where I'll just walk you through it. The second component of adding these definitions into the municipal code is that the state has mandated certain zones in which these uses must occur. So emergency housing or shelter uses must be allowed in any zone where a motel is currently allowed. And that's because the types of impacts that you might expect to see would be consistent with that of a motel use. It's tends to have a more transient nature associated with it, and you would have fewer long-term residences, I would say. And then permanent supportive housing and transitional housing facilities are required to be allowed in any zone in which residential units or motels are allowed. And that's again because the types of impacts you're going to expect to see with those uses take the form of a more traditional apartment complex or a single family housing unit. So those changes are reflected in this use table. And apologize, I misspoke earlier. Special needs housing is already in the code, but it was modified to remove transitional housing facilities. So when we move down to the use table here, we're adding permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, and emergency housing or shelter into the zones that are required by HB 1220. At the end of your agenda bill packet, you'll see this crosswalk describing the existing code definitions and what is required by HB 1220. And on the right, there is a box where we marked whether or not the existing code is consistent with the requirements of HB 1220. As you can see, currently, we are not in compliance with the requirements of HB 1220 because we do not have the definitions required by the law, and they are not currently allowed in the use zones that are mandated. So after incorporating these changes into the municipal code, the code would be in compliance with the requirements of HB 1220.
Sure.
Yes, Council Person Johnson.
As with our extended discussions previously about HB 1110 last year, were those modifications to requiring certain types of housing and certain kinds of zoning applied to effectively the downtown area, but not so much to the Ridge because they were attached to zones. Is this kind of a similar thing where Snoqualmie Ridge has one big zone, mixed use final plan, and then there's a development agreement / mixed use final plan that has all of the rules for which lots can have what on them and what the restrictions are. Was this 1220? Is that what the number was? Anyway, does that preempt those kinds of agreements like HB 1110 did not? Or is it kind of similar where effectively this applies to the downtown area where we have actual zoning?
Yeah, that's a good question. In practice, it's going to be very similar. The use table in the municipal code has been modified to allow for these uses as required in the MU mixed use zone. However, such a use would need to be consistent with the other parts of the mixed use final plan and the Snoqualmie Ridge development standards.
That's what I figured.
But as a technicality, yes, these uses are allowed by the municipal code in this in the mixed use zone that Snoqualmie Ridge occurs in.
So allowed by zoning in the code, but not allowed necessarily in the mixed use final plan as written.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything precluding this type of development. However, given that Snoqualmie Ridge is essentially developed, I would have to check. And it would depend on where in Snoqualmie Ridge and what portion of the which mixed use final plan is applicable and what the expected have. So yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wadden.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I've got some questions around the jurisdictional housing requirements or housing needs allocations that came through the state to the county, to Puget Sound Regional council. I struggle with this because we know that with Reclaim Shelter Services, there are about 60 individuals that are in emergency housing between the two cities of North Bend and Snoqualmie, yet the state has designated 287 emergency housing shelters. We have about 3,600 residents in the whole city. And it's a huge burden on us for emergency housing, with 287 being expected, and yet we only have about 30. It's a 10-time increase of that. My concern is this, is when will the state come along and say you're not meeting the emergency housing goals or targets for 2044, therefore you need to do it now without the services, without the transportation, public transportation that other cities have. I want to make sure that we're putting some parameters around this. And Director Arteche, you may have, a balanced discussion over that, but maybe it's our way of saying, we're only going to take a certain amount of emergency shelter housing because that's our capacity.
I completely understand what you're saying, and it's a very good question. It's just not applicable to the actual code amendment at hand tonight, because tonight we're just looking to bring our code up to the standard from 2021. And if we don't, then we won't get compliance of our comprehensive plan housing element. And if we don't get our comprehensive plan housing element compliance, then we don't change the numbers for the growth target that we set in place last year. They're all connected and they're all important. But if we go ahead and make this change and bring our code up to speed where it should have been a few years ago, we do what the state would expect us to do, taking the right steps forward to acknowledging that we're doing the best we can do at this moment in time, knowing that we do have a growth target reduction process happening right now in place. And you should see those numbers change for our projected affordable need. So we will have to rebalance them. They were at one point set to mimic exactly what our growth target was, and that was 1,500. So 1,500 projected affordable need doesn't seem to be right if we're going to go for a reduction.
One follow-up to that, and maybe this has very little to do with the emergency housing piece, but the concern is this. Department of Commerce has not yet fully explained how emergency housing fits into that 1,500 requirement, the first 1,500. Have you gotten clarification now on where that fits in the 0 to 30?
The county readjusted the numbers on behalf of Department of Commerce. So the county's DP 13, I believe it is, their policy and their countywide planning policies stipulates exactly what number each city has to take at what projected affordable need. So we have that information.
Okay, including the emergency
Mhm.
housing
Yep.
as well.
Mhm.
Are they, at some point, where is it appropriate for us to say, we're going to address the emergency housing that we can absorb versus what they've assigned?
Part of our growth target reduction discussion with King County.
Okay,
Yeah. And we're leading that right now with the Growth Management Planning Council. And we do have another meeting coming up to discuss that reconciliation process.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Excellent. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much. I do just have a quick question. SMC on exhibit A, under exhibit A, SMC section 17.10.040 E definition. Just the last sentence here gives me a little bit of hesitation, and I'm sure there's a plausible explanation, but these facilities may include day and warming centers that do not provide overnight accommodations. So at first glimpse, when I read that, kind of think, well, how does that actually fit into emergency housing or shelter?
Yeah, so that component of this definition, remember that this definition was started at the state level as emergency housing and a separate definition for emergency shelter. As we've opted to combine them, now the components of both are in this definition. So as an emergency shelter use, you could have a day facility that perhaps provided services during the day like meals or warming centers, but did not offer or provide overnight accommodations. And that's the type of use that would be that this is referring to.
Mhm.
However, also under this use, you could have what you might think of more traditionally as a housing shelter, where you have, a certain amount of beds available that provide overnight services and different types of on-site services associated with that. It does say like they may include day and warming centers,
Okay.
but it's more of like a permiss, like it doesn't have to be either or, it can be both, it can be either.
Okay. So I think may is the operative word. It's not, limited to
Yeah.
day and warming centers.
That's the intent of
Okay.
This definition. It's not a shall, for example. It's expanding the definition beyond what you might think of just as like an overnight accommodations. It's also allowing just for daytime uses.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. Are there any other questions? So for you. Anything for you, Councilmember? One. Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wait here. All right. So that brings us to our next discussion item. Next on the agenda is Agenda Bill 24-602. It's an MOU, Meadowbrook Farm Docent Services. And Director Artecha, I'm saying that right, so Artecha will introduce this item.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, council members. Today is the start of a wonderful day for Meadowbrook. This is the third document of the trio, the last and the third of this trio of Meadowbrook Farm documents. This is a memorandum of understanding for docent services, and that refers back to the actual Meadowbrook Farm Association, the folks that have been running Meadowbrook Farm and doing all kinds of things, budgeting and cutting grass and maintenance. And they really want to get back to what they really intended to do from day one, many, many years ago, and haven't really had a chance to get there. And that's docent services. So this memorandum of understanding would set the parameters for what that would entail. I would like to just state that this is the first time that our city has had a chance to review the memorandum of understanding, and it still needs to be reviewed by the Meadowbrook Farm Association before we make a motion to recommend it directly to the city council. So there might be a little bit of continued adjustment as you read it and discuss it. I also would like to say that it has been through a similar committee at the city of North Bend, and we are working side by side to move the memorandum of understanding together as closely as we can through our councils.
Okay.
So happy to answer any questions. We do have Mike Chambliss here as well, our city administrator. So this is really opportunity for you to see if this document is something that we could move forward to present to the association.
Thank you very much, Director. Okay, I'll open up the floor for any questions concerning the MOU, Meadowbrook MOU. Okay, Councilmember Wadden.
Thank you. I've had the privilege of being involved in many of the conversations around this, and the docent program is going to be a very good separation of duties for managing Meadowbrook. As Director Arteche mentioned, they've been all one. I mean, they've been the governance, they've been the budget, they've been the keepers of the land, and now we've got those coming together in separate pieces. This one will give them the chance to focus on just education and great programming. And I think that however this ends up, it's going to be great for the longevity. We're going into a 25-year agreement between the two cities on how to manage the property, as well as the involvement of Skyview Parks for maintenance and ongoing scheduling of the use of Meadowbrook. So I think it's a very positive thing.
Excellent. Any other questions?
Not for me.
And I don't have any questions at this point, so thank you very much on that, Director. Okay. All right, so that brings us to our next discussion item, which is SB 5290.
Hello again.
Hello?
So SB 5290, so this is just a discussion item, and it's something that we're flagging for you guys relatively early on. For some background, and you may already be aware, there are minimum requirements for all cities planning under the GMA to process permits in a timely manner. Currently, prior to SB 5290, that deadline was standardized across the board for the majority of types of permit applications, and the deadline's at 120 days. So a city must render a decision within 120 days of determining an application as complete. That clock stops if the city has to ask for more information or the applicant needs to do additional environmental studies. And it starts back up again when the application comes back into the city's hands. So that's just kind of the framework that that SB 5290 is looking to amend. It's looking to standardize and encourage cities to process different types of applications according to different permitting deadlines. So the summary of that is in this agenda packet. It's 65 days for permits that do not require public notice. So that could be like a normal building permit. 100 days for permits that do require public notice. So becoming more substantial, and 170 days for permits that require public notice and a public hearing. So that could be a rezone, for example. You'll notice that for most types of applications, the permit deadline is decreasing from the current minimum or maximum of 120 days. Only for applications that require a public hearing is it increasing to 170 days. There are other aspects of this legislation that would require cities that have permit application fees to refund portions of the application fee if these deadlines are not met. However, Snoqualmie does not have permit application fees and it has a different billing structure, so those portions would not apply. The last component of this is that for cities of a certain size, there is a permit processing timeline reporting requirement for cities over 20,000 residents. So that doesn't apply for the time being to Snoqualmie. However, sometime in the future it could. And at that time, the city would be required to begin monitoring and reporting its how efficiently it was complying with these requirements.
Thank you very much. I'll open up the floor for questions concerning SB 5290. Any questions?
It's pretty straightforward to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Actually, Chair.
Yeah. Let me see. Sorry, trying to move mine. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Just a quick thing. I really appreciate the administration and our staff for really getting on some of these changes that come from the state that affect our code and making sure that they're all straight. I have never been through it, but I can just imagine how frustrating it'd be if someone was a developer and they're encountering different codes for different levels of government that are all supposed to be uniform and together. And it's just really nice to see us staying on top of those kinds of updates, and I encourage us to keep doing it.
Absolutely. I'll second that I'm excited to see that we're going to be able to expedite some of these permits a little quicker. So that's welcome news. So if there are no further questions, City Administrator, did you have something? Okay. If there are no further questions, if there's no further business, come to order before the commission, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All right. We are adjourned at 6:39 PM.